let us get on with this business.
Bill, the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022, the means of introduction and first reading.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I move that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022, being an act to make revisions and supplementary provisions for the services of Sierra Leone for the year 2022, be read the first time.
You may take your seat. Honorable members, the question is that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 being an act to make provisions and supplementary provisions for the services of Sierra Leone for the year 2022 be read the first time. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
The bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022, being an act to make revisions and supplementary provisions for the services of Sierra Leone for the year 2022, has been read the first time. Second reading.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I move that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 be read the second time. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, you will recall that in presenting the 2022 budget, the recovery of the economy was predicated on an end to the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on growth and service delivery. Growth was initially projected to reach 5.9% in 2022 and average 4.4% in the medium term. Unfortunately, an unpredictable event reared its ugly head. After nearly 2 months into the implementation of the 2022 budget, the war in Ukraine broke out in February 2022. The war has had devastating consequences on the world economy in general, with already overstrained supply chain disruptions. This impact has, in part, further severely disrupted supplies of essential commodities, including fuel, fertilizer, wheat, leading to supply shortages and sharp increase in prices. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, we are submitting to this noble House a supplementary budget for the financial year 2022 for the following reasons. Firstly, the macroeconomic and fiscal assumptions that underline the 2022 budget no longer hold, as Russia and Ukraine are major suppliers of agricultural and energy products, including oil, gas, metal, wheat, corn, and fertilizer. Countries, including Sierra Leone, are already experiencing an uncertain supplies and higher prices. The sharp rise in global food and energy prices, coupled with the general uncertainty, has slowed down domestic economic activities, undermined domestic revenue collection, and created pressures on the budget. Secondly, given the urgent need to protect the poor and vulnerable from the soaring food and energy prices, we will adapt mitigating measures, which I will present later in the statement. Thirdly, Given the need to ensure fiscal and debt sustainability and to facilitate the implementation of the emerging expenditure priorities, government engaged development partners, including the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the African Development Bank, for the provision of additional financial resources. Thankfully, reflecting government's commitment to implementing policy reforms, the World Bank will provide additional budget support and project grants to support energy and education programs. We also plan to use a larger share of the additional special dwelling rights SDRs allocated by the IMF to support the budget. The African Development Bank is providing support under the African Emergency Food Production Program. Fourthly, to expand the fiscal space to finance the emerging expenditure priorities, we are introducing additional tax policy and tax administration measures. These measures are aimed at increasing domestic revenues over and above the original projections. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the key objectives of the supplementary budgets are to safeguard the macroeconomic stability through prudent fiscal and proactive monetary policies, to protect the vulnerable segments of our society from higher food and fuel prices by expanding existing social safety programs and enhancing support to the energy sector, and to complete the implementation of ongoing projects as outlined in the original 2020 budget. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, consistent with Section 42, subsection 1 of the Public Financial Management Act 2016, I hereby present the supplementary budget proposals for the 2022 financial year to this noble House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I will start by providing an overview of global and regional economic developments and their implications for our economy. Recent global and regional economic developments and outlook. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the April edition of the World Economic Outlook report published by the International Monetary Fund has revised the projected growth of world economy for 2022 downwards to 3.6% compared to 4.4% projected in January 2022. Global growth is forecast to average 3.3% in the medium term. In the sub-Saharan Africa, the pace of recovery that started in the second half of 2021 has slowed down significantly, reflecting the uncertainties from the spillover of the war in Ukraine combined with the high and the rising food, energy, and fertilizer prices. Growth in the region is projected to slow down to 3.8% in 2022 from 4.5% in 2021. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, global food and prices have soared during the first half of the year, reaching levels not seen since 2007 and 2008, and are projected to remain high in the near and medium term. The price of Brent crude oil is projected to average $100 per barrel in 2022, a 42% increase from 2021, and its highest level since 2013. Agricultural commodity prices are forecast to rise by 18% this year, reflecting higher cost of inputs, including fuel, chemicals, and fertilizers. Inflation is therefore projected to remain elevated in all regions of the world in 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I will now provide a brief overview of domestic macroeconomic and budgetary performance during the first half of the year of 2022 financial year in light of these global geopolitical economic developments. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, The crisis in Ukraine is threatening to undermine the nascent recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and reverse recent gains in stabilizing the economy as projected in my original statement of economic and financial policies for 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the spillover effects of the war are negatively affecting all facets of our economy. Slow GDP growth, high inflation, weak revenue performance, increase in government expenditures, fall in foreign reserves, and adverse terms of trade. The negative impact is on key sectors, including agriculture, cannot be overemphasized. The growth prospects of the economy in 2022 are weaker than initially anticipated. The disruption in fertilizer supply has led to a sharp increase in the global price of fertilizer. In Sierra Leone, the price of fertilizer, including urea, which is commonly used by our farmers, has increased by more than 70% between January and June 2022. Against the background of the general uncertainty in the global economy, combined with higher food, fuel, and fertilizer prices, the initial growth projection of 5.9% for 2022 has been revised downwards to 3.6%. Reflecting the continuous increase in international fuel prices, government was compelled to adjust the domestic fuel pump price upwards to avoid supply shortages. This combined with higher food prices, the depreciation of the exchange rate, and other factors have led to an increase in consumer prices. Inflation rose to 24.4% in May 2022 from 16.7% in January 2022. With food inflation increasing to 26.3% from 15.7% over the same period. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total exports increased to $266 million in Q1 2022 from $153.5 million in Q1 2021. Mainly due to the ramp-up of iron ore exports, which increased nearly by $100 million over the period. However, bauxite exports dropped from $10.7 million to $3.2 million over the same period. The difficulty of accessing the seaport around the Black Sea makes it impossible for Dimetco to regularly ship bauxite to its parent company in Romania. Diamond exports also dropped by 20% to $39.2 million. The value of imports dropped to $380.5 million in Q1 2022 from $444.1 million in Q1 2021. Driven mainly by a fall in the import of chemicals, crude materials, machinery and transport equipment, and miscellaneous manufactured goods. However, the value of food and fuel imports increased by 60% and 38% respectively over the same period, reflecting the higher global food and fuel prices. The exchange rate has remained under pressure during the first half of the year, mainly reflecting increased demand for foreign exchange required to import food and fuel at higher import prices. The official exchange rate depreciated by 14.9% between January and May 2022. Gross foreign exchange reserves dropped to $739.42 million at the end of May 2022. From $931.76 million at end December 2021, reflecting mainly increased foreign exchange requirements to import essential commodities in the face of rising global prices. Domestic revenue performance. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, Following the impressive performance in 2021 on the back of recovery in economic activities and improved tax administration, domestic revenue collection weakened during Q1 2022. Domestic revenue collected in Q1 2022 recorded a shortfall of 330 billion euros and was also lower than amount collected during the same period in 2021. Several revenue streams were below their respective quarterly targets, including petroleum excise duties, goods and services tax, fisheries royalties, and timber export levy. In general, the weak revenue performance can be attributed to the delay in adjusting fuel prices, reduced tax compliance, public resistance to tax reforms, especially the use of electronic cash register, and supply chain challenges in the export of bauxite and timber logs. Grants. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total grants received during Q1 2022 amounted to 244.4 billion euros. Of this amount, program grants mainly in the form of debt relief assistance under the Catastrophe Containment Relief Trust amounted to 222.1 billion euros. Project grants amounted to 22.3 billion euros. Total expenditure and net lending for Q1 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total government expenditures and net lending amounted to 244.4 billion euros, 4.6% of GDP in Q1 2022, compared to 2.99 trillion euros, 6.3% of GDP for the same period in 2021. Of the total, recurrent expenditures amounted to 1.99 trillion, including wages and salaries of 1.1 trillion, goods and services 193.1 billion euros, subsidies and transfers 467 billion euros, of which energy subsidies amounted to 237 billion euros. Total interest payments amounted to 240 billion euros, of which domestic interest payment was 184.5 billion euros, and foreign interest payment was 56.1 billion euros. Capital expenditures and net lending amounted to 333 billion euros, of which domestic capital spending amounted to 208.7 billion euros. Government's response to the impact of the Ukraine war. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the sharp rise in food and fuel prices occasioned by the war in Ukraine has worsened food security situation in the country, pushing more vulnerable people into poverty. To cushion the impact of the crisis on the poor and vulnerable households, government is implementing several mitigating measures and will seek external financing to complement domestic resources to implement these measures. Monetary policy response to the crisis. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the Bank of Sierra Leone will continue to focus on its core mandate of ensuring price and financial sector stability while supporting government's economic recovery program. Monetary policy implementation during the first half of 2022 is challenged by the high inflationary pressures driven by the rising energy and food prices and continued depreciation of the exchange rate. Like most central banks around the world, the Bank of Sierra Leone responded appropriately by raising the monetary policy rate by 75 basis points in March 2022 to dampen inflationary pressures. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, given the soaring food and fuel prices coupled with the depreciation of the exchange rate, the Bank of Sierra Leone in April 2022 established 2 new temporary special facilities. A special food facility in the sum of $50 million to support the importation of rice, flour, and sugar, and a special fuel facility in the sum of $50 million to support the importation of fuel. These facilities are expected to ensure adequate supply of these commodities in the market, reduce the pressure on the exchange rate, and stabilize domestic prices. Expanding the social safety nets. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, at the request of the government, the World Bank has agreed to reallocate funds to the Contingency Emergency Response Component (SAC) of the Free Education and Social Safety Nets Youth and Youth Employment Projects to facilitate the preparation of emergency operations. The objective is to mitigate the impact of higher food and fuel prices on the vulnerable groups, including school children and the very poor in our society. Under the Free Education Project, $12 million will be provided to scale up the school feeding program to cover 15 districts, including Western and Rural. ID pass for school girls, teaching and learning materials, and examination fees. Under the Social Safety Nets and Youth Empowerment Project, the allocation for cash transfers will be increased from $4 million to $10 million to scale up the coverage of the cash transfers. The Emergency Cash Transfer Program will target an additional 35,000 beneficiaries, mostly women, engaged in productive activities in urban and rural communities. This will increase the total number of beneficiaries to 70,000. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, we will also use the additional SDR resources allocated by the IMF to support the implementation of activities in the supplementary budget. Part of these resources will also be utilized to support the expanded school feeding program, 60 billion loans, and cash transfers, 20 billion loans. Emergency food production support, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. Government has also secured financial support from the African Development Bank under the Emergency Food Production Facility in the sum of $2.1 million to support farmers with agricultural inputs, especially fertilizers, to enable them to boost production with a view to addressing the looming food security crisis. Support to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, you will recall that government established the Munafa Fund and approved the sum of 100 billion euros to enhance access to finance for micro, small, and medium enterprises from 2020 to 2023. To date, government has released the sum of 30 billion euros into the fund. Of this amount, 26 billion euros has been disbursed to financial services providers for on-lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. About 75% of the beneficiaries are women. Government will disburse additional funds to scale up the program as part of efforts to mitigate the impact of the Ukraine war on the MDAs. Fuel and electricity subsidies, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. The recent upward adjustment in domestic pump prices is not sufficient to cover the cost of fuel pump at the pump level. Thus, total indirect subsidies on fuel amount to 380 billion euros for the period January to June 2022. In the case of electricity, the rise in price of fuel has led to an increase in the subsidy provided by government to the energy sector. Reflecting the higher fuel prices, total subsidies to the energy sector are now estimated to increase to 538 billion euros from 122 billion euros in the original budget. Revisions to the original 2022 budget, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. The unprecedented increase in the price of food, fuel, and other goods and services, coupled with the depreciation of the exchange rate, has brought additional expenditure pressures on the financial year 2022 budget approved by this noble House in December 2021. Some of these expenditures include the recruitment of additional health workers, teachers, security forces, and staff of tertiary institutions and related wage costs. A general increase in the price of goods and services procured by government, an increase in the cost of subsidies to the energy sector, and higher debt service payments. Furthermore, there is need to expand social safety nets to mitigate the impact of prices on the poor and vulnerable population. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I now present the supplemental budget in the form of revised revenues and expenditure projections for the financial year 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total expenditure and net lending is revised upwards by 1.4 trillion to 13.2 trillion, 25% of GDP, reflecting the increase in both recurrent and capital expenditures. Recurrent expenditure is revised upwards by 1.2 trillion to 9.4 trillion, 17.7% of GDP. And capital expenditures by 231.3 billion euros to 3.9 trillion, 7.2% of GDP. Of the recurrent expenditures, the wage bill is revised upwards by 416.2 billion to reflect the total annual cost of the increase in the number of health workers, teachers, security forces, staff of tertiary institutions. Goods and services expenditure is increased by 100 billion to capture the increase in the general price level on goods and services procured by government. Subsidies and transfers are increased by 550 billion euros, reflecting mainly the increase in energy subsidies due to the sharp increase in the price of fuel, as well as additional funds allocated for road maintenance. Total interest payments are also revised upwards by 124.9 billion euros, reflecting the expected increase in interest payments on domestic debt owing to additional borrowings and the rise of treasury rates. Expenditure management measures for the second half of 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the Ministry of Finance will continue to improve budget execution to avoid expenditure overruns and the accumulation of arrears. To this end, the Ministry will endeavor to regularly release quarterly budget allocations on time, align these allocations with cash forecasts, and implement the principle of no budget, no funding to ensure the adherence to approved expenditure ceilings. We will seek technical assistance from the IMF to adopt the strategic top-down budgeting approach to ensure that the total level of expenditure is determined before detailed items in the budget are negotiated, so that it properly reflects aggregate fiscal policy priorities, hence improving the credibility of the budget. The Ministry is also taking steps to strengthen the functioning of the Cash and Debt Management Committee. The committee is now meeting weekly to review revenue expenditure performance and area accumulated and paid down. The committee will prepare and review quarterly cash flows and determine the borrowing requirement of government. Efforts will be made to reconcile revenue expenditure issues amongst all parties, that's the NRA, the Accountant General Department, and the Bank of Sierra Leone, before every meeting, using a unified data template the cash forecast and policy options will inform the budget execution. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, revised revenue projections. The uncertainty created by the war in Ukraine is undermining domestic revenue collection efforts. As reported earlier, domestic revenues collected in Q1 2022 fell short of target by 330 billion euros. Despite this shortfall, we are confident that the total collection for the year will exceed the original target through the implementation of several tax policy and tax administration measures as follows. Government will continue to implement the policy of fuel price liberalization to insulate the budget from volatility in international fuel prices and create a fiscal space for spending on priority programs such as free quality education. Government will work with relevant stakeholders to review the instruction to mobile network operators issued by NATCOM on floor price for mobile calls. In addition, the following tax administration measures will be implemented by the National Revenue Authority for the remainder of the year. We will continue with efforts to engage taxpayers through workshops and meetings to educate and train them on the ECR and NITAS system, integrate the electronic cash register with existing billing system of taxpayers, strengthen the capacity of field and desk audits of the financial and petroleum sectors, enforce differentiated penalty rates for late and non-filers, expand the application of export levy on timber and related products that goes through land borders, implement the administrative phase of block management systems in the Western area, roll out of mobile payment apps for especially the small and medium taxpayers, collaborate to establish a revenue court to try top tax cases, including those defaulting and resistant to taxpayers. On this basis, domestic revenue is revised upwards by 144.6 billion to 7.79 trillion, 14.7% of GDP. The projected increase in revenue will come mainly from income taxes, which are expected to increase by 217.3 billion euros. Mineral royalties are also projected to increase by 79.8 billion euros on the back of the expected increase in iron ore production and favorable market conditions. Revenues from government ministries, departments, and treasury TSA agencies will increase by 67.9 billion euros. Despite this, some revenue streams have been revised downwards. In particular, customs and excise duties are projected to decrease by 189.8 billion euros after considering the shortfall recorded in Q1 due to the delays in adjustment of fuel pump prices. Goods and service tax GST is revised downwards by 14.2 billion on account of the anticipated drop in private consumption owing to higher consumer prices. Road user charges are also revised downwards by 16.5 billion euros. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, revenue mobilization measures at local level. Government is cognizant of the fact that the sustainable delivery of public services at the local level will require improved mobilization of internally generated revenues by local councils. Local revenue mobilization can foster political and administrative accountability by providing financing over which local councils have the most discretion to implement demand-driven public services. Government will therefore prioritize the following reforms to boost local revenue mobilization. Conduct an assessment of existing property cadastral system with a view of rolling out an appropriate property tax system across all local councils. Introduce modernized business licensing systems. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, revise external grants. Government is also proactively seeking additional budget support and an emergency energy support grant to help address emerging expenditure pressures. On this basis, grants are projected to increase by 990.2 billion euros to 3.2329 trillion, reflecting the increase in the budget support by over 667.8 billion euros to 1.45 trillion euros, and the emergency energy support grant of 170 billion euros, both provided by the World Bank. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, revised budget deficit and financing. The overall budget deficit, excluding grants, is revised to 5.4 trillion euros, compared to the original deficit of 4.2 trillion euros. Including grants, the overall deficit is projected at 2.2 trillion euros. The deficit is covered by net external financing of 271 billion euros, net domestic financing of 1.1 trillion euros, SDR use of 856.9 billion euros, and G20 DSSI net repayment of 39 billion euros. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in conclusion, while we look forward to the end of hostilities in Ukraine in the near future, the supplementary budget demonstrates government's commitment to addressing the adverse effects of the war on our economy and people. In response to the ongoing crisis, the budget presents an opportunity to intensify domestic revenue mobilization efforts, boost domestic food production, support SMEs, strengthen social protection systems, and deepen human capital investment to boost the economy's resilience to shocks. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, let me at this juncture thank His Excellency the President, Dr. Julius Maada for his vision and political leadership through these challenging times. His guidance during the economic management team and cabinet meetings continue to be extremely useful. To the Vice President, Dr. Mohamed Jul Ejalo, who maintains regular contacts with the Ministry of Finance on various issues, I say thank you very much. I would like to thank the Chief Minister and Cabinet colleagues for their collaboration and support in broader public financial management. I want to assure them of the Ministry's commitment to continued engagement as we navigate through these difficult times. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to my two Deputy Ministers of Finance for supporting me in managing our economy during these trying times. Let me also appreciate the Financial Secretary, the Principal Deputy Financial Secretary, the Chief Economist, and their team in the management of the Ministries of Finance for their support in preparation of this supplemental budget and policy statement. I also want to thank the Governor and his two deputies, management and staff of the Bank of Sierra Leone for their continued collaboration and coordination in the management of the economy. The Commissioner General, management and staff of the National Revenue Authority deserves a special commendation for their tireless efforts in mobilizing domestic revenue. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would like to commend this honorable House of Parliament for the effective bipartisan role played under the leadership of the Honorable Speaker in passing legislation brought to this House that are contributing to the cross-sectoral policies, maintaining fiscal discipline and improving economic performance. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would also like not only to recognize but to express my profound gratitude and appreciation to our development partners, especially the IMF, the World Bank, the European Union, the African Development Bank, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, the Islamic Development Bank, the Saudi and the Kuwait funds, BADIA and the governments of the United States of America, China, Ireland, Canada, Japan, and the UN family for their continued support. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, as usual, the government printer and staff rose to the occasion and printed the supplemental budget and policy statements, including annexes, on time. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, let me reiterate that this budget is a continuation of a series of interventions, including improving food security, deepening investments in human capital development, and protecting all vulnerable groups to enhance our economic's resilience to shock. I therefore commend the supplemental budget and statement of economic and financial policies for the 2022 fiscal year to this House.
And with that, we move.
I therefore move Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I move that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 be read the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Honorable members, the question is that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 be read the second time.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I want to take this singular opportunity to thank the Minister of Finance and team for putting together the supplementary budget and his eloquent presentation this morning. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I do believe that both constitutional provisions and the PFM Act of 2016 have been fulfilled and satisfied before the presentation of this budget to the House this morning. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the course of the debate, with your leave, I may wish to remind honorable members that this is a supplementary budget, and therefore, while debating, we should not lose sight of SO 96.3, and so that we confine ourselves basically to the situation presented under the supplementary budget this morning.
SO what? The one I had you say does not exist.
69G, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, Mr. Speaker, honorable members.
I'm perfectly okay as the honorable member.
Okay, sir.
Thank you. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker,
Proceed. I know you read 69 as 96.
thank you.
That's all. Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members. For supplementary budgets normally, a funding gap must have existed, for which probably funds appropriated in the previous budget are insufficient, and there have been emerging issues for which expenditure must be made, and the funding must have been available to address those emerging issues. And in this circumstance, by the presentation of the Minister of Finance, we are pretty sure that monies will be available pretty soon to solve those expenditure areas. And so I may want to encourage members of Parliament, like I already mentioned, that this is a supplementary budget as a result of probably the funding gaps and emerging issues, and that is why the Minister of Finance is here to present the supplementary budget in the House of Parliament. But as per law, it's only Parliament that will give approval, that will appropriate money to be used for the consolidated fund. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the Minister of Finance have articulated eloquently. He has given cogent and potent reasons why the supplementary budget this morning. He has given an overview of the global economic outlook. He has given an overview of the situation in Ukraine, and Sierra Leone is part of the global community. And definitely, some of the soil you see today in the food prices and fuel prices as a result of that situation of fighting in Ukraine and Russia. He has equally given to explain the fall in the domestic population process as a result of very many factors. And so, with all of those challenges government is faced through the Minister of Finance, there must be a situation in which those challenges must be mitigated for the financial year 2022. And I'm sure the Minister is here to present basically that. And so going forward, we can be able to cushion the effect of the situations we are facing right now. As a country in the world, we are not in isolation, but definitely global shocks like this must affect Sierra Leone, and these are the problems we are going through. And I think in the appropriation bill, the Minister have gone further to explain specific institutions that will benefit from this appropriation, be where there has been funding gap and there have been emerging issues where funding is needed. Overall, when we look at the appropriation, the total is there as stated. And institutions have been enumerated. For example, the Ministry of Defense will definitely benefit from this appropriation, this supplementary bill. The Sierra Leone Police. These are institutions with large operational areas. Sierra Leone Police equally benefits. The correctional center equally benefits. We know they deal with dietary and other situations for inmates, they will benefit. The Ministry of Energy. This government is all over the place trying to put in place proper energy infrastructure. So we need a lot of money in those areas. The road maintenance fund. I want to believe that in almost every constituency in this country, there has been the handiwork of the road maintenance fund. Constructing culverts, bridges, and the grading of roads. And so definitely I think they need much more money to ensure that of course, public debt. This is one of the situations that is way in government. Our public debt is so huge. And so therefore, the supplementary budget equally go for public debt. Contingency fund will equally benefit from this. Salaries and wages. The minister have rightly said that we have continued to employ workers in the health sector, in the education, and of course, every member of parliament will want our conditions of service to be improved. So this will come under wages and salaries. Development activities are continuing and definitely will need extra resources for those. So, and finally, we need monies so that the entire situation we are facing as a country, we can be able to mitigate and solve the shocks in which, as a nation in the world, we have been facing and to which we are struggling in this country. And so, like I mentioned earlier, this is a supplementary budget. We can debate, but definitely we confine ourselves to these areas, and it's a continuation of the 2022 budget that was read and passed in this parliament, and we pass it so that the Minister of Finance, once the resources are available, they can implement. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honorable Minister for his contribution.
They want commission of service.
I know you are alone. I can see that you are alone. Well, that's why you are alone. Not to give me an option.
Want to introduce Mr. Kula and the
You know, this speaker doesn't like ultimatums at all. He's alone, so you stand alone. Before I give the floor to any of you to engage yourselves in this debate, let me remind you of the provisions of SO 69. And more especially 69.3. And the use of the word strictly. Strictly. I would like to, for edification, to read it. Well, you will know the limitations of 26 when you read 69.3.
Mr. Speaker, it's not to hear that. Don't hear everything.
The debate on the second reading of the supplementary appropriation bill shall be strictly confined, I repeat, strictly confined to the matters for which additional expenditure has been provided. That is the segment of 69.3 that I want to bring to your attention as emphatically as I can this morning. And those of you who have to do your usual obeisance to your maker, you know this is Friday. With that in mind, I will now recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I want to join the chairman for the Finance Committee in thanking the Minister of Finance for bringing before this House the supplementary budget for 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members,
and I listened to the Minister of Finance with rapt attention. I sensed a feeling of admission and acceptance that the bread and butter issue that was promised by this government will no longer or will never be available on the table of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, when the minister outlined the economic fundamentals that are responsible to move the economy forward, we realized that the minister did not miss his words. He was very clear to say the pressure on the exchange rate is enormous. Inflation is going up. And even the revenue mobilization by the NRA is projected to decrease. Because even the first quarter, there was a fall in the revenue. This is clear to me that we are, like SO2 people say, if belly don't boil, not ask how much months. Our economy, this is no secret, our economy is in shambles. I'm bringing before this house a supplementary budget that is asking us to increase or to inject more money into the economy. Are we not adding inflation? Are we not putting pressure? Because the simple definition of inflation is when too much money is getting two figures. And now already we are asking
the elementary definition.
The minister,
we are most of us.
And that's why I said from 3 economists. You don't need to go to a class.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, point of order. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, point of order. Mr. Speaker, for the edification of the public,
Which public?
the other members need to clarify if the NRA has projected to decrease their revenue collection or to increase. We want to make that clarification because we are in front of camera. If it is decrease or increase, let's have that very clear.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the honorable member was not listening to the minister when the minister was making his presentation. You were not here, honorable member. So don't worry. I am simply saying we are already in a dying situation. Inflation is said to be over 20%, according to statistics here. And now we are increasing, or we are asking Parliament to approve.
Mr. Speaker, it's past 12. I move that we suspend SO52 so the business of the House will continue.
Yes, let me deal with the motion before the House first, before I make 1 or 2 other comments. Let me second that to the motion.
I so say, Mr. Speaker.
All in favor of the motion, say aye. Those against, those against say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, before you know, it bears repeating again. I thought when I did it once, I would not have to read the second. But alas, I have to. Read 69.3. And there is very good reason for using the word strictly. Strictly. You have to confine your contributions strictly to the matters for which additional expenditure has been provided. When you stray beyond those matters, you're obviously going to invite so many points of order. And you people with your points of order, there are far too many. The point of order is not designed to interrupt.
Mr. Speaker, don't worry, it's new. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, I was just referring to the presentation made before us by the minister. And on that note, as an economist, I think it's important that in as much as we are trying to pass whatever bill in this place, it is good that we raise some of these issues, so that when the minister goes back to his office, he will take into cognizance some of these points, especially those coming from the opposition. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I want to again state here that in as much as the minister is here is asking this house to increase or to approve an additional budget for 2022, I would like the minister to explain or to allay the fears of this house if the increase in this budget will not affect the prices of goods and services in the country. This is important because our people are crying. They are dying all over the country, especially Kailamu and beyond. Kelema yesterday demonstrated on the increase in the prices of fuel.
Point of order. I'm on my legs, please, Honorable. Mr. Speaker, this is just a caution. Given the general circumstances of the state and what has been said so far about Parliamentary Senate, I would urge colleagues to be careful about what to say in this particular debate.
Thank you very much. It is an open secret. If our people are suffering, and I'm a representative of the people, I am duty bound to say it whenever I have the opportunity. The even colleague members of Parliament seated before us, they are suffering. Some of them walked their way to Parliament because of lack of petrol in the country. In my town this morning, somebody called me. A liter of fuel or of petrol is sold at 35,000 euros, black market. I want me to come here and start saying praising the president or the government? No, I will not do that. 35,000 euros. People are now abu-blacking across the city because of what is happening. The solution is in the hand of government. Government knows what to do, but they are shying away from that. And the issue there is clear. If we are asking Parliament to increase the budget of energy, of the Ministry of Energy, because we want to subsidize the buying of fuel to provide electricity, what is wrong for government to reduce or to subsidize the petroleum that is killing our people. What's wrong about it? Why can government not sacrifice just 10, 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 euros so that we stabilize the price on the pump price? This is simple and straightforward. On that note, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I also want to know and ask the minister. We budgeted huge sums of money in these ministries. We budgeted for the Ministry of Defense 112.35 billion in this 2022 budget. For the Sierra Leone Police, 5.197 billion. For the Collectional Center, 60.609 billion. For the Ministry of Energy that we are subsidizing, I narrow my analysis on the sectors that the minister is asking for the supplementary to be done. For the Ministry of Energy, it's 126 billion. These are huge sums. And we are just halfway to end 2022. And today, we are asking for an increase. For an increase. I'll go to the bill, the supplementary bill. For energy, apart from the 126 billion, we are now asking again for the same energy to have 415 billion. This is far above what we budgeted. Mr. Speaker, you are aware of the provisions on the PFM Act. You are aware of the provisions on the PFM Act of 2016. Why the figure for the supplementary budget far 3 times or 4 times that of the actual amount we budgeted or we approved in this house. Mr. Minister, you have to answer this one. Why is it that we, in just 6 months, we approved 126 billion, and today we are asking this house again to approve 400 and above billions. 3 times energy, 3 times the actual amount. Why? And blackouts or power cuts is all over. In my area where I live, it's 1 day in, 1 day out, and you are not even sure of it. I stay very close to the deputy FS. I stay very close to him. You can attest to that. He's there. 1 day in, 1 day out, and you are not even sure of your day in. And now we are asking to increase the budget on energy by 4 times what we approved in 2022. This, I think, is not correct, Mr. Minister. We can provide explanation. Mr. Minister, also, when you look at the road maintenance fund,
Latif,
The great man.
acting leader.
I am a member of the Works Committee, and the chairman is the deputy leader of this house. Few months ago, there was an oversight. And myself and the honorable sitting by my side here or next to me, we went on the north side of the country. And we realized that most of the roads, Most of the roads that this government claim to have been gravelled, are not there. For example, Mr. Speaker, from Kamakwe to Kabaferi, 11 billion euros was contracted. 11 billion euros. About 11 billion euros. From the same Kamakwe to Tompa Referee, 7 billion euros. I was with the Minister of Works. When we went there, it was in fact the very day we went to the place. That was the day the contractor brought a machine to do the work. Nothing. This is waste of government money. And today we are asking Parliament to provide to road maintenance fund the sum of 135 billion euros. 135 billion euros. Mr. Speaker, this is no secret. Why these contractors are not working or they are not delivering the service to the people? It is because, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, most of these people are party card carriers. And because they are party card carriers,
there is a point of order.
But before then, I had the honorable member for Bombali questioning the reasons for the supplementary budget. But I think when I made my statement, it was very clear that the Ministry of Finance is in compliance with the necessary provisions both in the Constitution and the PFM Act. But definitely the Minister will elaborate further when we will be making the statement. But again, 69.3, we have said that this is a supplementary budget. One of the more reasons why, even in my own statement, I think it was short, because this is just an addendum to the 2022 budget. So for us to spend the whole day here, I don't think of any relevance.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Chairman. It have been better.
This is not a classroom for lectures.
It have been better the Honorable Chairman allowed the Minister to respond. But nevertheless, let me bring to this House that I am not averse to the increase in budgets or allocations to different MDAs. I'm looking at the value for money. Are we really utilizing these resources? I've just cited an example of 2 key roads. Kamakwe to Kabaferi, 11 billion. That is not small money, Mr. From Kamakwe to Tampere, 7 billion. Put together, 17 billion. And you go there is no machine, there is no work. So for that reason, if you are asking again for more, I will have to tell the minister, maybe he's not aware. So that in the process of discussing this money, there will be an effective monitoring so that what has occurred will not repeat. So on that note, please, honorable members, allow me to do my presentation.
You want to go one man overside?
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, based on this, Mr. Speaker, I will avoid the necessary SOs so that the business of the house will continue. I'll stay away from that.
No, but there is one SO you cannot avoid.
Mr. Speaker, unless...
One SO you cannot avoid.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I know.
In fact, two.
I know.
In fact, two.
I'm running up. I'm running up, Mr. Speaker.
I've already mentioned 69.3. There is 38.
Mr. Speaker.
There is 38.1.
Let me round up. Let me round up on the minister's presentation. One of the justifications for this budget is to reduce the suffering, or is to provide more social amenities for the people of Sierra Leone. That is one of the justifications made by the minister. But I wonder why utility MDAs, like water supply projects, like school, free quality school education. These are essential and necessary. And in fact, the school, the free education, the free quality education, is the flagship project of His Excellency, the President. Why is it that the amount allocated to education, for example, is 20 million? That is a drop to the ocean. That's a drop. And we want to express ourselves that we care for the people. Even the provision of microfinance to small and medium-sized enterprises. You will agree with me, Mr. Speaker and honorable members, that it is not reflective when you go to the ground. Our people are still struggling. They are hungry. And you know, when somebody is hungry, we are afraid. We are the primary politicians, honorable members. We are the primary politicians. We interface with our people at all times, day in, day out. And they are suffering, they are hungry. What have you done to address that issue?
And with that,
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, we are asking for an increase in these MDAs. But as we speak, there are still MDAs that have not received a dime since the beginning of this 2022 financial year. Over 50% of them. What are we doing? Local council is an example. University is an example. What are we doing? Why are we not addressing these other MDAs? They are here. They are disgruntled. They are here. They are not receiving anything. They have not received a dime. So the allocation is just on paper. Just on paper, I allocated 5 billion euros.
Honorable member.
I allocated 5 billion euros to this ministry, and so for the rest of the financial year.
Honorable member.
Yes.
I have received no notice from anyone that if ceded to you their time. None. And if I exceeded the time.
Mr. Speaker, I'm running up.
No, we'll be running up for the past 10 minutes.
I'll give you my own time.
1 minute to go.
And that's it. Use your appropriate.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to be very honest, the minister sitting before us here is a very good minister. I work with him in the agriculture ministry. As chairman for agriculture.
I'm sure
it's just that he's challenged.
But he cannot
with the current situation
for anybody.
He's challenged. He's facing a situation, or he inherited a ministry that was suffering from corona, and now to the grave.
Your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Nobody will dispute that we are all suffering. By the same token, nobody can play miracles at this time. I'm sure you will agree.
How about you guys? Sit down, please.
I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I want to join my colleagues to express our gratitude to the ministry and colleagues and staff of the Ministry of Finance for giving us a very good supplementary budget. Good in the sense that from all indication, the ministry is telling us that they don't want to bite more than they can chew. At the same time, my learned friend from Bombardier has already given us all the reasons why we need supplementary budget. He has already explained to us how people are suffering, blah blah, and want to alleviate the suffering of the people. So that is why we have come into this supplementary budget. Some of the ways, according to the ministry, that they are alleviating this the suffering of the people are the monetary policies that they have put in place. They told us about 2 facilities that they are bringing on board. The Bank of Sierra Leone is bringing on board. With your link, they are bringing on board a facility that is, they are budgeted for $50 million, and the fair facility for $15 million too. Because my brother there was saying that people are suffering, they do not have food on their table. At the same time, people are blacking. So for us to avert this blacking and people to have food on the table, that is why the ministry is very proactive to be thinking about bringing 2 additional new facilities. Secondly, the wage bill that they are complaining about has increased because for now we're anticipating to have about another 1,000 vehicles to nurses. All of us are aware of that. The teachers also are anticipating for additional people. We will have to ensure that we provide the necessary wage bill because he has already told us that they are working in line with the IMF policies. They don't just want to pay monies that they have not projected for. And for the revenue, he was saying that the revenue is anticipated, projected to drop. But I want you to take you back to paragraph 50 of this, paragraph 50 of this statement. That revenue is expected to increase. Initially, the revenue dropped in the first quarter by 330. Yeah, but revenue is now anticipated to increase because of the several measures that National Revenue Authority is taking. So we are expecting revenue to increase by the end of the year. So my learned friend was saying revenue projected to decrease. And that is not the case.
What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable from Kenema has just misinterpreted or misunderstood what I said on the internal revenue. I said, Mr. Tifawan, we are not here. This is not lecture room, Mr. Speaker just said that. The point is, the Honorable sitting behind you, Honorable from, I don't know if it's from Ujeum or so, from Moyamba, the Honorable from Moyamba, was the one that said, I said, the projection for internal revenue mobilization was meant to reduce. That was not the case. I said the minister in his presentation said the first quarter of the revenue mobilization by NRA and dropped by 300 and about 300.
If the only number is debating again.
No, it's not debating. The point of order. No, his point of order is to allow him to clarify what he said. He's done so, please carry on.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member, please carry on.
Thank you, sir.
This point of this point of order, this point of order. Where will it lead you?
As long as they do the right thing,
For the records, if you have withdrawn that you do not see the revenue is projected before, I want to take you to paragraph 43 of this statement. That despite this shortfall, we are confident that total collections for the year will exceed the original target for this period. So it means we are expecting the total collection for the year to increase. Despite the shortfall during the first quarter of this year, revenue is expected to increase at the end of the year. So that is what the minister told us. Now I also want to take you to the conclusion of his statement. Conclusion, which he has already told us that while we look forward to the end of the crisis, the hostilities in the world, this supplementary budget demonstrates government's commitment to addressing the adverse effects of the war on our economy and our people. So that is what this supplementary budget is aimed at. And what my learned friend did was to help or to elucidate the reasons why this supplementary budget. Because he already told us that, because he did not tell us whether it was the war, but he told us that people are suffering. And the people are suffering. That is why the ministry has brought the supplementary budget to alleviate the sufferings of our people. People are lacking from, they are not constructing roads, blah, blah, blah. That is why the government has brought this particular supplementary budget, so that from July to December, there will be improvement in the economy. As chairman of Education Committee, Higher Education Committee, I want to remind the minister that gentle reminder that the tertiary education, especially our 5 public universities, are kindly requesting for their supplementary, their subventions for this first half of the year. That the wage bills has increased. So please, Mr. Minister, then don't forget, because I did not say anything about the technical and higher education. I only saw something on the basic education for the supplementary budget. So please don't forget our technical and higher education, because at the end of the day, all these people are going to feed back into the higher education. So please don't forget them. Perhaps it is subsumed in the other parts of the wage bill and whatever. So please, always mindful that we have a technical higher education. It's not only the basic education. So on that note, I want to allay the fear of our brothers out there that the government has put in place measures, both monetary and fiscal measures, to ensure that the economy can pick up again, especially after this the Ukraine crisis and whatever. So assume the Ukraine crisis still continue, the government has still put in place policies that can alleviate the sufferings of our people. Thank you very much.
I thank the honorable member for his contribution. Let me remind honorable members that this is not a platform for symbol application. So I'm winding up this debate.
Thank you.
I'm winding up the debate. It's a supplementary budget, not a full-blown budget. On that understanding, I give the floor to the leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Colleagues, I know many of you want to talk, but this is not every day that we talk politics. We have listened to the honorable member from Mali and the honorable member from Kenema. There might be some new points members will want to raise, but they will not be drastically different from what we've had. But by and large also, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member from Fusion has to know that he's a leader in this house. Apologize to me. I accept his apology. Mr. Speaker, I have accepted his apology.
Not willingly.
No, willingly, I accepted it willingly.
I was forced to.
No, you are not. Mr. Speaker, we have to. Somebody is causing noise behind my back, Mr. Speaker.
That's SOS.
No, not SOS. I don't want to call you. Mr. Speaker.
Somebody has just arrived there.
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, we know that the economy is challenged. We know that. And the coming to this house of a supplementary budget speaks volumes. We should not run away from the fact. The minister has been sincere enough in accepting the challenges. Mr. Speaker, I'm not hearing myself.
From your own side.
No, I don't know whether it's on my side, but I'm not hearing myself. I don't have voice in this place. I have colleagues. No, AKK has been very quiet. He is desperate to talk, but I've asked him to go use the media. He's desperate. Mr. Speaker, the supplementary budget, as I said earlier, speaks volume, and the minister has been sincere in his presentation. Whether we like it or not, we have said it times without number that we should not play politics with the economy. We should not play politics with the budget. So, Mr. Minister, thank you very much. The issues that were raised by my colleague from Bombali, they are genuine concerns. He is not attacking. He is raising concerns. And he said he is expecting the minister to respond to his concerns. That is why we are here. Mr. Speaker, I will not waste the time of this house. It is a supplementary budget. The chairman of the finance committee and his team, now you have more work to do than before. We don't want to talk about law. The more you talk about law, the more you find gaps. That is why I have avoided talking about law. Compliance with this, compliance with that. Let us don't go through those crucibles. But Mr. Minister, yourself and your team, you have engaged the Parliament before, but this time more than ever. Because we know there was a time when Ebola was not tolerated to be used as an excuse. Now again, other factors have been used as excuses. What is important is that we should ensure that the budget works, Mr. Minister. That is what is more important. And you cannot have a successful budget if you run away from Parliament. The honourable member from Kenema has a lot to offer. So also the honourable member from Bombali and other colleagues. We have some who are extremists, but we have some who are rational. Engage Parliament. Don't behave like the band governor who always runs away from Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I just want to say that, Mr. Speaker, you are pointing at her. Mr. Speaker, we support this part of the motion, that is the second reading. When we go to the next stage again, we will advise ourselves. And on that note, I take my seat. Thank you very much.
I thank the honorable leader of the opposition. He has set a good example, not only in this debate, but he usually does. And I'm sure the leader of government business will take the cue from you.
I'm going to be brief, very succinct in my presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, colleagues, all those who are unable to make their contributions, not because we want to deprive you, but because this is just an attempt to the financial budget read in 2022. One thing I admire this set of officers in the Ministry of Finance, they had the foresight in looking at the economy, the projections. But what the leader of the opposition said, as I said in the educational sector, for the general sector, we should not use it as a political slogan. So we should not politicize it. We have to fix our educational system. Also, by extension from the leader of the opposition said, looking at the global trend of the economy all over the world, we are still not driven economy. We rely on our partner to support our budget. We are not a manufacturing industry. We are, but a very minimal scale as compared to other serious economies in the world. We are faced with difficulty from the corona. We are now moved to the war in Ukraine and Russia. As fact, predictions are going for Britain that they have increasing an inflation 9.1%. Towards the end of the year, they will go to double digits, 11% and more. In the fiscal strategy statement that was laid in this parliament in 2019, they clearly stated in paragraph 45, fighting inflation. What are the parameters? Today, Mr. Minister, in line with what you said in your policy, in your strategy paper, I would like to read it directly so people can understand the level and the trajectory you took as a ministry. Paragraph 45. The decline in inflation will be driven mainly by stability in exchange, tight monetary policy supported by prudent fiscal policy, as well as improvement in domestic food production. However, there are downside risks. Including possible continued increase in international fair price, and depreciation of the exchange rate, and consequent pass-through effect on domestic prices. This was given to us, the Fiscal Strategy Statement FSS for 2019 to 2023, and now we are seeing it happening. Now it's happening. So at the time you are trying to fight inflation, going down that particular paragraph, you projected in bringing the inflation rate down, depending if the circumstances under which you did the projection remains the same. But now it's different. You highlighted extensively talking about Ukraine and Russia war. Nobody was predicting it. But now inflation is all over the world. In America, stronger economy in the world, they are fighting inflation. We are not exceptional. So the better we fail to remove and politicizing the economy and look out for solutions. How do we solve? How do we come to combat the challenges we are facing in our economy? The better for all of us. Of course, you well stated in your budget speech 2022 paragraph 155. You are very clear on the wage bill and salaries. He said we expect the wage bill to go up because there is increase in salaries. Somebody said about binkos. A lot of other commitments to government policies. So you don't expect, if you want to change the lives of ordinary people, you don't expect to have a wage bill going down. Realistically, the wage bill must go up. But what we need to do, as the honorable leader of the opposition said, the chairman for the finance committee, we need to do more work in line with our oversight functions. How do we sanitize the wage bill? That should be our effort. How do we harmonize the wage bill? As I said in my statement for the presidential speech, I will still repeat myself, that if you somebody in parliament working at the same range will have take home 10 million, whilst the other working in another department, say for example, NATCOM, will take home 25 million. These are distinct disparities we need to address. Thank God today they are here, and we are committed to look at the way bill in front of us in parliament. That's what we can do. You have been so honest and focused in what you are doing. During the early part of 2020, looking at the macroeconomic budgetary performance in 2020, we said in projections they said looking at the economy to contract by 3.1%. And they said they did not see that. That's why I like the present crop of officers we have at the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Minister, you said we should have QAP, the Quick Action Economic Recovery Program, so that we can mitigate some of the challenges that we are facing. Because you have seen the contraction, 3.1%. And the rollout of the QAP aided us to solve so many problems. And also the Munafa Project program, talking about the national microfinance. To talk about the support of the small and medium enterprises. All of those we are put in place in your budget speech. Prepare our minds for difficult times like that lies ahead. By then, nobody was talking about the Ukraine-Russia war. But it projected only for COVID. Now Ukraine-Russia war has compounded the problem. We need to talk about it. If America is talking about increasing prices, we should talk about it. Yeah, all over the world. Just watch the news. CNN, Sky News, all over. People are demonstrating all over the world for increasing prices. So, what he said in paragraph 43 of his party statement is very clear. You said it's good for bringing down inflation. But you said there are risks involved, there are things that you need to do. So, I think you have been doing a very good job. For us, he did not only say it, but he have documented the effect to prove to us. But what interests us for us to note, there is another projection coming, Mr. Speaker. Very good projection coming. We are not looking at that full shortage towards the end of the year again. They have predicted that we are going to face food crisis all over the world. So what they have done, they have rolled out what we call the agricultural credit facility. They are still subsidizing for a smart subsidy they have done for rice production. But in a month we are trying to sustain the food production, they are still subsidizing. So what he did, Mr. Minister, in the budget, in 2022 budget, allocation was paid for the same agricultural productivity to go ahead in rice production, 80.8 billion euros for 12,000 farmers. In 2022 budget, these are allocations, these are visions that they have seen. So that's the reason, more so, we are talking about the supplementary budget. The policies are there. But the driving force behind the policies is talk about the finances. You have to get strong economy. So they have pushed all of these things today. It's very open. He said it in the presidential speech. The president said it. It's very difficult for us to continue to give fees of subsidy for fear. Subsidy for fear is not sustainable at this time. So he has also stated that one. In paragraph 36, it's very clear. And the last paragraph, we're talking about 538 billion. Project that one with the daily revenue collection. It's a huge challenge. We are expecting, you see people in line at the fear stations. These are unprecedented things that are happening within our economy or within our market system. You go also from 2 weeks ago, we had a petrol price at 15,000. 18,000. We are projecting it. What you have anticipated? 21,000 or more. Those are the projections you're hearing. Yes. So we are really pleading with you, Mr. Minister, with all of the projections we are hearing today. We hope you can look out for ways to mitigate it. Because it's difficult with 15 to 18. And we are seeing you all over the place. So we know it's a global phenomenon, it's a global crisis, which we hope, and just as what he did for the projection for the COVID, and we are able to sustain certain pressures, and we also looking forward that the present day crisis, we can be able to solve that one, the policy that he can roll out. In America, they have suspended gas tax. Oh yes, they have suspended gas tax. So it's suspended. There are no more tax on gas. To mitigate the prices, they have done that. So you see, it's not rocket science. It's a day-to-day reality we are faced with. So, Mr. Minister, just as you did for the looking at the macroeconomic budgetary performance in 2020, and now you are talking about the agricultural credit facility, but we need to involve the right production. And let me tell you, Mr. Minister, the ECOWAS, we have done some assessment for the pre-harvest. They say we can get bumper harvest if all the conditions set put in place. We can get bumper harvest next year or so season. But there are conditions we have to do. There are conditions. And the conditions are what you have rolled out about the 8.8 billion to support our farmers for 20,000 farmers. These are some of the conditions and some of the things that we need to do. But if we have money, if you don't have money to support your policies, to drive your policies through, there is nothing we can talk about. So it's good. I was expecting the chairman for the agriculture committee to talk about it. Because that's the allocation in the budget. We don't have, we call them allocation, we call it revenue. The money is not there already. So we are Alright. As I said, I will still move on that it's good for us. Questions have been asked. I made believe Mr. Minister, where he said, look, Mr. Minister, we have seen the price issue of people. We know we are not petroleum production country. But what we can do, what are the policies in place? That's the day-to-day reality we are faced with. We cannot compare our economy to America, to Britain, etc., etc. But they are feeling the pressure of the Russia and the compounded with the COVID. So we will receive the end. We can talk about a lot of these things. That there are projections for agricultural rice production, all of those things are going on. So we thank all of you, Mr. Minister, with your team. You have done a very good job. But we cannot sustain, not sustainable to have the subsidy for fuel, especially for the energy production. It's not sustainable. We have to have a rethink. We have to face with the reality. There's the reason we are saying every day, because we are using the car power ship, they are using gas. They are using it. So it's very difficult to combat that one with coming from Bumuna, etc., etc. So we need to rethink what drive are we going to take to see how do we combat some of this pressure coming from external factors. Let me remind you again that most of our question our people most of it is important. So those are some of the things that we need to think about. And we should not politicize the effects coming to us in dealing with this economy. Because the ministry, they have done their projections, they are feeling the pressure, they are very realistic. If you go through their budget statement, their policy statement, go to their website, they are very clear about it. They said double inflation, we are eating inflation, domestic debt, and external debt, all of these are pressure on the economy. We need to do something. Parliament, we are here to help Parliament, we are here to do our own. So all of these things we put in place. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lord bless us all.
I thank the leader of government business for his contribution. Over to you now, Mr. Minister, to respond to some of the concerns raised, and then move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable members, I listened attentively to the debate and appreciate the comments from members of Parliament with regards to supplemental budget. The issues raised by members of Parliament cannot be exhaustively discussed or responded to. But in the generality, I note your submissions and note your concerns, and I believe I should be able to engage the leadership after here going forward on the issues that they have highlighted in the well of Parliament for further discussions. So on that note, Mr. Speaker, honorable members of Parliament, your submissions are in high consideration by the Ministry of Finance. Going forward, I will ensure that we work together and engage Parliament on economic matters in this country, both sides. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, as a brief response to the object of why we are here, is because the estimate that I provided in December 2021 is not as a matter of poor economic management, but the forecast that we did at that time is no longer tenable due to global trends, problems globally in the world economy. Let me not allay the fears of the honorable member from Bombali that financing of this particular budget is coming largely from donors. And it has no intention of causing inflation. It is not money that is coming directly or the Bank of Australia will be injecting to support our budget or to support the economy. But at the end of the day, we also require some domestic taxes to support this particular budget. The reductions that I learned or heard from the debate is not that we are reducing taxes. What I explained in the speech is that we anticipated too much from the custom side of the revenue authority, and therefore we've seen, because of supply chain disruptions in trade, we could not rely more on customs, that we intensify our revenue collection from the domestic tax collection. So we decided to increase the domestic tax revenues, GST and the likes, whilst we should not depend more on customs because of the inflow of the difficulties in trade facilitation. In the educational sector, we are supporting the educational sector, be it higher education or basic education, from donor-funded projects to a large extent. We are increasing expenditures within the educational sector that should be supported by grants from the World Bank. The $12 million we were talking about, or that I inscribed or discussed with the fund, we agreed with the World Bank, is there to support expenditures within the budget so that it will not constrain those sectors. Similarly, I know generally fuel is a debate all over the world. I listen attentively to both sides of the aisle. We will note that and discuss further. But I would want to say that even in the great United States, a few days ago, yes, they were talking about reducing certain taxes from gas or petroleum products. But before then, they are producers of oil. They have gone ahead and decided to be putting into their system about 1 million liters every day. So they did not only reduce, but they are pumping fuel into their system because they produce it. You'll be hearing about prices that the Ministry of Finance or the PRA or the Trade Ministry are in discussions for increases. I told you in my budget speech that in 6 months we spent about 380 billion used from the budget supporting fuel subsidy. That's about over $30 million in 6 months that government used to subsidize the fuel. In the case of energy, there has been an issue of providing fuel that has led to the increase in the subsidy that we have agreed on. All of these have been agreed upon in discussion during our review with the IMF. We're just here because we don't have the authority to just inscribe economic figures and decide to implement issues of the economy, but by law to consult you and kindly ask your permission as House of Parliament for you to give us the necessary approval for us to implement what we have read here today. On that note, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, we are open to discussions even after here on the matter or the issues raised.
Move now.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I move that the bill entitled the Supplementary Act 2022 be read the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Honourable members, the question is that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 be read the second time. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
The bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022, being an act to make revisions and supplementary provision for the services of Sierra Leone for the year 2022, has been read the second time. Committee stage.
No. Mr. Minister, in keeping with SO 69-3, I will now invite you to proceed and make a motion for the third reading and passing into law the supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I report that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 having gone through
Just go straight and move that if read it the third time and passed it to law.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the question is that the Supplementary Act 2022 be read the third time and passed into law.
Thank you. Honorable members, the question is that the bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022 be read the third time and passed into law. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
The bill entitled the Supplementary Appropriation Act 2022, being an act to make revisions and supplementary provision for the services of Sierra Leone for the year 2022, has been read the third time and passed into law.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. You may now take leave of us. Any announcements?
Honorable members are hereby informed and invited to a pre-legislative hearing on the bill entitled the Political Parties Registration Commission Act 2022. on Monday, 27th June 2022 at the Committee Room Number 1, Parliament Building at 2 p.m. Signed, Honorable Abdul S. Marie Conte, Chairman, Legislative Committee.
Thank you, honorable members. With that, the House stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 28th. Just want to show. 28th of June at 10 a.m. prompt.
Great smiler. Yes.